Daniel Lewis, number 3 on the Rejuvenation Olympics, which makes you the third slowest aging person in the world. How's that make you feel?
Makes me feel really happy. Also a little sad because I used to be number 1 for a brief period of time, and then I got bumped down to number 2 and then to number 3. So we'll see. Hopefully I can regain the number 1 spot someday. But for now, I'm happy with number 3.
Yeah, very ambitious, very ambitious. Now, here you are, the perfect human specimen. But was that always the case? What led you to this place? Did you ever had some hardships in your path along the way?
I've been interested in health for a long time. So growing up as a child, my parents did a good job making sure that I ate healthy food and didn't have any excessively unhealthy habits. So I had a good foundation from my parents, and I have to thank them for that. And then in my early 20s, I became interested in longevity research, just like a casual interest. I would read about it from time to time. And I would live a pretty healthy life for a 20-year-old. A lot of people at that age are doing a lot of heavy drinking, and when they're in university, I didn't do too much heavy drinking. I lived a reasonably healthy life for an early 20-year-old. And then once I got into my late 20s and my early 30s, I became more serious. So I'd always eaten a good diet, a Mediterranean or Mediterranean adjacent diet. But then I became stricter and began excluding more junk food. And then after crossing 30, I thought it was time to become more serious about my longevity protocol. So I began doing more exercise than I had previously, taking sleep more seriously. And then when I was 33, I began my supplementation protocol, which I really credit for getting some of my more drastic results. But I think the foundation, my strong foundation, has been there for many years. The foundation of diet and exercise and lifestyle.
And you are now
35.
35, all right. You must be also very busy. You're a lawyer, is that correct?
That is, yeah. So I'm a lawyer in Austin, Texas, and yet my job does keep me pretty busy. Lots of reading. I don't have it as bad as some lawyers, but I'm definitely quite busy. So I think the protocol I follow, the fact that I'm able to make it work for me with my busy job, should be reassuring for other people that you don't have to be independently wealthy with lots of leisure time to make good health a priority.
How busy are you? Tell me, how much do you work?
I work like 8 to 10 hours a day. Thankfully not more than that, but 10-hour days happen from time to time. And then I have other responsibilities of life, like the chores that most people have to do, friendships, relationships. So it all adds up.
Family, kids?
No kids. I do have a wife, and then I have my parents live in the same city as me. My wife actually is also on the same protocol as I am. So maybe later we can talk about her results in addition to mine. I have a two test subjects instead of just me to measure my results by.
What are her results?
She's thankfully been able to get results that are almost identical to my results. A similar decline in epigenetic age by several measures, reductions in inflammation, and some improvement to her pace of aging. Although I still have the higher pace of aging in our household. Or sorry, the lower pace of aging in our household.
Okay. And what does she do?
She's a professor and she teaches in education. She teaches about teaching is how I like to describe it.
Oh yeah, very meta. And what do you want to achieve here? You are starting to take this health stuff very seriously. But what's your vision? You wanna compete in the Rejuvenation Olympics, or it's more like your personal goals that you wanna fulfill?
It's really my personal goals. I want to increase my health span as much as possible so that for as much of my life as possible, I'm in good health fit, able to live my life without any sort of impediments, able to travel and exercise and do whatever I want. And then by extension, that will result in an increase in lifespan, because I think it's difficult to maximize your health span without also elongating your lifespan at the same time. So I'd be more than content with maybe hitting the 120 years goal. We'll see. But the Rejuvenation Olympics is just a fun, like a fun side project, a fun competition. I don't really measure my ultimate success by that, but it is nice to have a high ranking spot on there. It tells me I'm doing something right.
Just recently, Andrew Steele has tweeted about this lifespan versus health span fallacy. If anyone would like, check that out. He's explaining why it's not a really great distinction. Couple of things. Let me just, because I've just heard something really cool about just games in general. So bear with me for a moment. So the original argument of Bernard Suits, the game philosopher, with the book of The Grasshopper, the main argument of that book is that in an utopia where all our problems have been solved, then all we can do is to either play games or die of boredom. Therefore, the meaning of life is playing games. And the cool thing that I heard is that Aristotle had some similar way of thinking, that activities have value and not outcomes. So ultimately, when you achieve some outcome, it's like, what's the point of that? Because you wanna feel in certain kinds of way, but that's not valuable in and of itself. The struggle that you're taking up is the one that is valuable and not the goals. So then the question is, what are those activities that you're doing for their own sake and not for their outcome? And that's actually the definition of games, right? So anyway, games are the meaning of life, and the Rejuvenation Olympics is the game, the ultimate game one can play. And you're doing pretty good.
It's interesting that you say that, because I guess so. Ultimately, I'm doing all this in order to secure the outcome, not just for the sake of it. But I do enjoy the process also. I enjoy the process of reading research in this field, and I enjoy exercise. I enjoy eating a Mediterranean diet. So really, I'm doing this whole protocol with a certain end goal in mind, but then I'm enjoying the journey also, which I feel very fortunate for, because I imagine not everyone enjoys eating a strict Mediterranean diet or exercising, and so the process would be not fun for them, and really it would be done purely just to achieve the outcome. But I don't have to make that distinction. I can enjoy the process and seek the outcome also.
Enjoy the most.
You mean about my protocol, or just in general?
I meant about your protocol, but maybe just in general, that would be a better first question. Tell me that.
Well, in general, I guess I enjoy accomplishing things, accomplishing goals I've set for myself. And then in terms of my protocol is really just a series of goals, mini goals that form major goals. There's the major goal of maximizing health and longevity, which is then composed of other goals like achieve this result on this test, or achieve this new personal record in your weightlifting or in your cardio. And so really the Rejuvenation Olympics and the process of trying to maximize my own health and longevity is just a fun series of goals for me.
How much are you geeking out on this? Like, you have the goals and sub goals written down, or yeah,
Not it's all in here. I don't really
on in there.
I mean, I did write out an outline of my protocol, but I don't do any sort of detailed uh tracking or journaling, or I don't have any charts.
Okay, so what do you track? that's not on charts? Like, tell me the extent of your tracking.
Well, when I first started getting stricter with my diet, I would track the calories because I do aim for a very mild degree of calorie restriction, no more than 10% calorie restriction. But after a while, I got comfortable that I could track that just in my mind. So I stopped tracking it on paper or on my phone. And so now I just track it in my head. I track my weightlifting progress, my cardio progress. I just take notes on my phone. I have some wearables, but I have been really bad about using them. I just have a hard time using wearables, but that's kind of something I could improve at. And then, but my favorite tracking, and this is where the charts do come into play, is with lab tests. So I like to track my inflammation levels, just general lab biomarkers, my epigenetic age and telomere age. And for that, I use True Diagnostic. It provides some really good suite of tests for epigenetics and telomeres and some other markers of biological age. And then I also track my metabolomic age with a company called Iolo. So that's measuring the levels, I think it's over 600 different chemicals in your blood and inferring a biological age from those. And then I'm looking to add in some other tests like a proteomic age tests that would measure the levels of proteins in your blood. And then I'm also aware of a glycan age test, which measures the levels of glycans in your blood. So I'm happy to talk on this show about any more of those tests. And I think there's some really interesting results, like really interesting information that can be gleaned from those tests.
So that's a very wide range of biological aging clocks, right? Like, even not many people are tracking or want to track so many of them. So I wonder if you could give us a primer on your knowledge of biological aging clocks. What's the worth of them? I guess there are some stuff that I'm mainly interested in. Let's say the Needham pace, Omicam, Symphony age, Pheno age, um, telomeres. What's the point of tracking them? Yeah, what do you know about these things emerging things?
So these clocks all measure different aspects of the process we call aging, which of course is a incompletely understood process. We're learning new things every day, but as we learn new things, we learn about different processes, different attributes of the body that change with age in predictable ways. And so these biological age clocks just aim to measure these processes. And so I think that it's difficult to rely on it's probably not a good idea to rely on just a single clock because no clock is perfect and each clock just reveals insights into one aspect of the aging process. But by looking at many clocks and looking at how they move, whether they're moving together, I think that can give valuable information about the trajectory of your aging. So these clocks can be grouped into a few main categories. There's clocks that look at your epigenetic state. There's clocks that look at the length of your telomeres. There's clocks that look at, those are the two biggest ones, I would say, the ones that have the most research behind them right now. Then newer clocks are clocks that look at your metabolomic state. So that's looking at the hundreds of metabolites that circulate in your blood. There's clocks that look at the proteins that circulate in your blood. Those are called proteomic clocks. Then there's clocks that look at the glycans in your blood. Those are glycan clocks. There's probably new clocks being developed that I'm not aware of, but the majority of my focus is on the epigenetic clocks and the telomeres. And then within the epigenetic clocks, you have many different clocks now that have been developed that all measure your epigenetic state in different ways. So you mentioned Dunedin pace, which is a clock that's used by the Rejuvenation Olympics to measure their competitors. And that epigenetic clock, it spits out a value that tells you how fast you're aging at this point in time. And the values tend to range between 0.6 to 1.4. So a reading of 0.6 would mean you're aging 0.6 years epigenetically for each one chronological year that passes. Conversely, a reading of 1.4 would mean you're aging 1.4 years epigenetically for each chronological year that passes. I'll just do a quick dive into how this clock was developed. So this one was developed by looking at the blood lab values of a large cohort of, I forget, like over 1,000 people in the town of Dunedin, New Zealand, over the course of decades. And then it looked at their epigenetic state as measured by their DNA methylation profiles at certain CPG sites, and then how that changed over time, and then how that DNA methylation at certain CPG sites changed with their health outcomes. So the Dunedin pace is considered a second generation epigenetic clock, or maybe third generation now, I'm not sure. And it has that distinction because it wasn't trained to look at how epigenetic changes change with chronological age. It was trained to match how epigenetic changes change with health status over time. So that makes it very responsive to changes in your lifestyle and in your health. More so than other epigenetic clocks. A lot of other epigenetic clocks are harder to change because they were trained to predict your chronological age or to predict some other aspect. But the Dunedin pace was trained to predict how epigenetic changes change with health status. And yeah, it's a fascinating clock. It's very predictive of subsequent health and mortality. So someone who's aging faster under the Dunedin clock is more likely to have health problems later on in their life than someone who's currently aging slowly as measured by that clock. And that was an info dump, so I'll let you take it back.
So you look pretty knowledgeable about these clocks, but I wonder how comfortable would you be if I could stretch or figure out where your knowledge ends here? Like, because the problem is when I have, let's say, doctors in the show, they are not really knowledgeable about these clocks, right? They cannot even say two of them. So everyone knows what the blood is, right? That red substance in your body. Now, how do you get to epigenetics from that red substance in your body? What are we taking out? What are we examining there? Can you zoom into that on that level?
Sure. So the tests are just extracting red and white blood cells from the blood sample, and then they're looking at zooming into the DNA within the cells, and then looking to see
Which
at
one?
certain sites.
The red or the white?
I think the vast majority of the tests use just white blood cells, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're looking at the genome, at the DNA within the cells, and at basically the pattern of methylation at certain key sites in the genome that are called.
But what's a methylation?
Methylation is where a methyl group, which is a certain like tagging chemical, is added to parts of the genome. And when genes are methylated, they can be said to be silenced. For most genes, when they're methylated, they're silenced. So their expression dials down. And then if a gene is unmethylated, its expression typically increases. Its activity increases. And so the idea is that by looking at these methylation patterns on the genome, mechanistically, it could be an indicator of which genes are being expressed and which genes are being suppressed. And we know that with age, these patterns change, and they may change in ways that lead to dysregulated gene expression, where genes that should be turned on are turned off, and genes that should be turned off get turned on. And that can result in impairment of cell function. So the way that your body programs your cells to do different jobs is through the epigenetic programming of the cell. So, you have the same DNA in your white blood cells, in a muscle cell, in a neuron. It's just the pattern of how the genes in those cells are expressed is what makes your cells take on these different defined roles. And it seems logical that if those patterns of gene expression become dysregulated over time, that would lead to an impairment of cellular function and then a manifestation of symptoms that we would call aging. But still, a lot more research needs to be done in this area. I'd say that's the general direction that it's going in, and trying to drill in now and identify specific methylation, specific sites that leads to specific changes in gene expression that then lead to specific changes in health. I think that's a huge area of potential. Right now, we've only identified, I think, a few such specific causal links. So the theory is there, and then the causality is being identified, but there's still a lot more work to do on the causality.
So I have low vitamin D levels. I don't, but let's say I do. And this could be figured out from how methylated at specific sites I am, right? So that's pretty cool, isn't it? Because like you don't have to directly measure vitamin D, like you don't have to take a lot of blood, but you can just look at a small amount of blood and look at the fingerprints that this is leaving. Like it's revolutionary.
Yeah, I agree. It's really it has a lot of promise because it could make it much more affordable to test many, many more things in people with just one simple blood sample. Because there's so much information contained in the epigenome that could be harvested for vitamin D or for many other to identify many other things.
Yeah, it's right now we get like 40 results from a blood test, but this is a much smaller sample and you can, yeah, the promise is that you can get thousands, maybe even millions of results that we don't even know they exist, you know?
Yeah,
All right. Well,
it excites me too.
I think you choose the wrong profession here. I didn't expect you to be so into this. Okay, before we go into your routines and nutrition and whatnot, can you tell me what's the story of your life?
That's a interesting question. Could take forever to answer it, but I'll try not to take up all our time with that answer. I guess for most of my life, I've been, or as long as I can remember, I've always enjoyed learning things and reading about new things, and especially learning things that help me understand how the world works in fundamental ways. And so that's led me down the path of reading about history, because I think you can't understand how the world works without understanding history. And then it's led me to read about science because, well, history helps you understand how humans work. Science helps you understand how the physical world around us works. And then my interest in science is what led me to read about aging, because that's something that impacts everyone. It's fundamental to the human condition. And then my interest in law. Law is what allows human societies to function. So I enjoy working with the law very much. So I'd say that that's one of my like defining characteristics is pursuing knowledge that helps me understand the nature of this reality that I find myself in.
Are you spiritual?
Not not very spiritual. I think about spiritual things from time to time, but it's not like a key part of my personality, I would say, but I give it some thought.
So, where do you experience the most hardships? Where do you need the most willpower?
You know what? At the risk of sounding arrogant, it's been going so well for me. I don't really feel much hardship with my protocol right now. But if I had to pick one area, um, I would say exercise is probably the hardest part because taking pills is easy. Almost anyone can do that. Eating a Mediterranean diet is easy for me because I love that sort of food. So no sacrifice for me there. Avoiding alcohol, but I keep myself to just one drink a week on average. I don't really enjoy alcohol that much. So that's an easy sacrifice for me. But exercise, having to drag yourself to the gym, even if you don't really want to, having to do a vigorous workout, even if you don't really feel like it that day, that's probably where there's the most hardship. But it's a good kind of hardship because it builds self-control and mental strength. And so every time you do that, I think you become a little bit stronger, both physically and mentally.
So, if you don't experience much hardships, then why is that? It seems like you engineered your life that puts you in a state of flow, right? So, how can you be in a flow? Is that your environment, the place where you live, or your family that's supporting you and doing the same thing? Like, what's your secret?
Well, I've been really blessed to have a wonderful family, great parents and grandparents. I've had great friends my whole life. I'm friends now with people that I first met when I was 8. So, and then I've got a great wife. So I really am blessed with wonderful family and friends, and I think that that really makes a big difference. That provides me with a great foundation, and really what I would love to do is get as many of them to start on a longevity driven protocol with me, so I could have them around with me for as long as possible. And so that was actually part of my motivation for tracking my results so meticulously and publishing them, is that I wanted to be able to show these results to my family and friends and say, hey, look, this is achievable for you also, potentially. I made a conscious effort to not do anything too experimental, too risky or strange as part of my protocol. I tried to keep my protocol very obtainable so that it would be easy for my family and friends to see my results and think, okay, this isn't too scary. I can try this also. So no, I haven't been injecting anything, haven't been doing any gene therapies or plasma exchanges. It's all just diet, exercise, style, and supplementation. But yeah, hopefully, I credit my family and my friends and my wife for much of the way I am now.
All right. One thing that you touched there, you know, in the longevity space, many people are talking about their own death and philosophizing based on that. But sometimes, or maybe a larger problem is the death of others, right? Like I have a grandma who has been diagnosed with something not good, but I can't, there is just no way in hell I can even get her to take a fish oil pill or something, you know? So
I know what you're talking about.
it's, yeah,
I'm sorry to hear that, by the way, but yeah, I've encountered that also with some people that I know, where the idea of taking any sort of pill is just so scary for them. Even something as benign as a fish oil pill. I think, yeah, I'm not quite sure how to handle that. Maybe you just get more than one doctor to tell them it's okay, and then you take the fish oil pill in front of them, then come back the next day and say, "See, look, I'm okay," and then do exposure therapy until eventually you take the fish oil pill with her together, and then I don't know. It's hard.
you see, once I took her, I make some really nice nutty pudding. It's not
Mhm.
the Brian Johnson nutty pudding, but something with chia and all kinds of nuts and stuff. But it tastes really good, you know, and super healthy. And I took it to her, and she was afraid to eat it, so she had to throw out after a week, you know.
Even just a nutty pudding?
Even the nutty pudding.
Maybe the problem is how you framed it for her. Maybe call it something more relatable, like this is a custard. This is a chocolate custard.
Maybe. Oh yeah, could have been. Anyway, tell me, how's the day in your life looks like?
So let's see. I wake up after getting about 7 to 8 hours of sleep. I find that usually I don't need the full 8 hours. Usually it's closer to the 7 hours. But I wake up around 8 a.m. and then I skip breakfast, so I practice intermittent fasting. So my first meal of my day is at lunch. So I get to work and I just have a black coffee and work, have lunch, Mediterranean diet inspired lunch. Although lunch, I have less flexibility since I'm at work, so I have to kind of just eat either whatever I can find there or whatever I've brought with me from home, and then work some more, come home from work like a bit after 6, and then have a quick snack, go to the gym, do either a weightlifting workout or a cardio workout, and then come home, have dinner. I try to be done eating ideally before, like, no later than 9 for sure. Be done eating no later than 9. Really, I'm trying to get that earlier. I'm not gonna be able to go like Brian Johnson and have my last meal of the day be at 11. I just don't see how I can make that work with my lifestyle, but I do think there's room for improvement for me to finish eating later in the day. And then after dinner, then I'll either socialize with family or friends or just relax, watch TV, read, work on whatever project or projects I have or errands, whatever chores I have. And then about an hour or 30 minutes before bedtime. So I try to go to bed around midnight. I'm a night owl. It's just the way my brain is wired. So around 11, I'll unwind and I'll start using blue light blocking glasses. And then I'll try to have the last thing I do before bed be reading. I find that reading fiction especially is really calming for me, really helps put me to sleep. Reading nonfiction doesn't work as well. I find that it keeps me up, and I think my brain is just trying to analyze it and think, what are the practical implications of this? What does this mean? When you're reading fiction, there are no practical implications. There's no analysis that needs to be, no message you need to take away from it to apply to. Well, I guess there are messages in fiction, but there's not a practical purpose to reading it. You're just enjoying it, and that I find really relaxing. And so then once 12 o'clock comes around, I take my sleep cocktail of some glycine, either glycine or tryptophan with magnesium, and then a microdose of melatonin, about 0.5 milligram of melatonin. And then boom, I fall asleep pretty quickly, and then the day starts over. Oh, and then I forgot to mention, coming back home from work or during work, around lunchtime maybe, is when I'll take my supplements. And yeah, that touched on everything.
So I'm going to ask the smallest, least relevant question, but I'm personally so interested in this. What's your rationale for taking tryptophan and melatonin at the same time? I thought they are kind of redundant.
Oh, well, tryptophan is converted by the body into melatonin. It's a precursor for melatonin, but that process takes time. And then tryptophan is also a precursor for a whole bunch of other chemicals in the body. So the microdose of melatonin is intended to provide an immediate boost to melatonin. And then the tryptophan gradually over the course of the night can be converted into melatonin as needed by the body.
Okay.
And that
Ah,
the microdose of melatonin I take sublingually. So it's just a little lozenge that dissolves under the tongue. So it gets absorbed very quickly.
okay. You said it caught my attention that for lunch you eat whatever you find. What does that mean?
So the company I work for has a cafeteria, and it's a very nice cafeteria, and they do try to have the meal options be generally healthy. And so I can usually either just through eating whatever main meal they have available that day, or by combining bits and pieces of other meals, I can create a meal that complies with my diet restrictions, which is really just to have a mix of vegetables, low glycemic index carbs, and then a healthy source of protein. I try to limit red meat to once a week, and then get the rest of my animal protein from either seafood or chicken. And then pork, I'll have pork once a week as well.
Okay, so fiber and protein, that's your main philosophy or diet goals.
Yeah, I would say the pillars of my diet are eat lots of anti-inflammatory foods, so foods that are high in omega-3, or lots of olive oil. I put olive oil on all sorts of things. And then eat carbs that have a low glycemic index to avoid blood sugar spikes. And then eat the rainbow of vegetables so that you get many different nutrients from your vegetables, and then you get good fiber for your gut microbiome. And then I try to eat some fruit as well. This is an area that I'm weak in. I often forget to eat fruit, but for dessert, I like to have some sort of citrus fruit like tangerines or oranges or mixed berries or maybe an apple. So I think that sums up my diet pretty well.
Do you have like some kind of restriction? Oh, in the morning I like to eat this kind of foods, and during the evening I like to eat this kind of foods, or it doesn't really matter?
No, I don't have any AM or PM food schedule. But well, I guess I could say that I basically have no AM food schedule. So yeah, I skip breakfast, and then my first meal is at lunchtime. But if I did eat breakfast, I don't think I would have too drastic of a difference.
All right, and what kind of pills do you supplement it with, or other supplements, not only pills, powders?
Yes. So I mentioned my sleep cocktail, which I've taken for many years now. And then back in 2023, I started what I call my longevity supplement protocol, which was, um, let's see, calcium alpha ketoglutarate, spermidine, EGCG, which is the active ingredient of green tea, vitamin C, and then a mix of NAD precursors, NR and NMN. And then all these supplements I took in liposomal form just to try and maximize absorption. And these supplements were designed to benefit my epigenetic health and then also to slow down my telomere shortening. And so I took a whole bunch of baseline lab tests before starting this protocol. And then I've been testing regularly since then. And I've been really pleased with my results. But the thought process I had when choosing these ingredients is I tried to choose ingredients that are found in the body naturally, that decline with age in the body, and that can be found at least in small amounts in food. The reasoning for that third point is that I want it to be a substance that the body has evolved to process an exogenous, meaning an outside supply of the body, so that it wouldn't disturb the body's fine-tuned balances. There's a concern, when you're taking hormones, taking supplemental testosterone suppresses your body's own testosterone production. So I wanted to avoid something like that. So all those substances meet those criteria with the exception of the EGCG, which is not found naturally in the body. But the others are all found naturally in the body, decline with age, and then can be consumed at least in trace amounts in food. Happy to talk in more detail about any of that.
How can I make my telomeres longer?
So telomeres are complicated. I think it's important to distinguish between actual telomere elongation and then slowing down or preventing the shortening of telomeres. So telomeres are protective caps at the end of our DNA. You can think of them kind of like the protective caps at the end of a shoelace. And then each time our cells divide, they fray a little bit until eventually, after a certain number of divisions, they've frayed completely. The DNA in the cell becomes non-viable, and the cell enters a state of senescence, where it becomes inflammatory and non-productive and has to be cleared by the body. And we have only a certain number of cells in our body. We do have an ability to create more cells from our stem cells, but even the stem cells decline with age. So you can think of your body as having as far as we're aware, a finite number of divisions due in no small part to the fraying of the telomeres. So if you could slow down that process or reverse that process of telomere shortening, there could be big implications for longevity. I think it's very difficult to actually elongate your telomeres. I am aware of people that have put together protocols to try to do that, and it seems like you can maybe get some small elongation. And then there are gene therapies that have been developed that seem to be able to elongate them. But of course, that's very experimental. My goal was more humble, just to stop or slow down the telomere shortening process. And for that, I used the NAD precursors, NMN and NR. I chose them based on research I found that increasing their levels and activating sirtuin-1 was able to reduce the amount of telomere shortening during cellular division. And I believe that was found in a in vitro study, meaning a study in the lab with cells, and then also in a rat study. And at least in my case, there seems to be something interesting going on, because True Diagnostics' epigenetic proxy of my telomere length at my baseline was 27. And then after 1 year on my supplement protocol, my epigenetic proxy of telomere length was that of an 18-year-old, which is very, very dramatic change. And my wife experienced a similar dramatic change. So I don't think, based on what I've read about NAD precursors and telomeres, I don't think I've actually lengthened telomeres in my body. I think what I've done is that the new cells that have been produced in my body from my stem cells, remember these tests are measuring white blood cells, which are produced frequently. I think I've just slowed down or stopped the telomere shortening process when these cells differentiate from the stem cells that are constantly producing new white blood cells. And so I think that is reflected in the test as a longer telomere length, because stem cells have much longer telomeres on average than normal cells. And so when they birth a new cell through differentiation, if you can prevent the telomere shortening that occurs during that process, that new cell that's developed, that's born, will have much longer telomeres than normal. So that's what I'm hopeful that I've accomplished.
All right, all right. I'm working on that as well myself for whatever that's worth. Also through diagnostics telomere protocol, right? A protocol proxy.
That goes back to what you were saying earlier about using epigenetics to measure other things that you might not think could be measured by epigenetics, like vitamin D. It turns out there's an epigenetic pattern that correlates very tightly with telomere length. And so that's what True Diagnostic is using to approximate your telomere length, which
Mhm.
is, I think it's really incredible.
Yeah, if it works, right?
Yeah.
What I've been doing is I'm taking astro astragalus extract. Have you ever considered that one?
I have. So that seems to be one of the substances that maybe can lengthen telomeres. It's definitely on my radar. On purpose, I tried to keep my protocol simpler and not have too many ingredients so that, family and friends could feel less intimidated by trying to copy my protocol and get the same results. But for a future version of the protocol that could be larger, I'm definitely interested in astragalus.
Well, I did 3 tests so far. First was baseline. Second, I was taking astragalus and it got worse. Then I started mega dosing it and it got better, but in the third test, but in a way that everything else got much worse. So my pace of aging has become at baseline it was 0.87 and on my third test it was over 1, right?
Interesting.
I was like, okay, but my telomere proxy has become better than the baseline, right?
Hmm.
So um, I don't know yet. Now I stopped taking it, and the last 3 months I actually didn't take anything. I wasn't traveling, So now I'm curious what will happen now, and then I keep experimenting. But yeah, N of one with a lot of all kinds of you know conflicting variables. So what will
That's
see?
really interesting that so it benefited your telomeres, but may have worsened your epigenetics, assuming there wasn't the confounding variable in there that you're not aware of.
Yeah, I think it was despite worsening my epigenetics, it benefited my telomeres, But maybe it was worsening it. So look, normally I take a lot of supplements because I have normally I was only taking like 5 kind of supplements, creatine, fish oil, vitamin D, multivitamin. This was my protocol for over 15 years. But I started hosting this podcast and people like you are coming to my show and they are telling me so good things about all kinds of supplements. So I ended up taking 50 pills a day plus powders and extracts and all kinds of stuff. So taking 50 different kind of supplements. But now I had a huge washout period.
So what you can start fresh now.
Yeah, yeah.
I find it's really easy to get overwhelmed because there's so much information and there's so many things to take. So I tried to pick out just the one. I tried to get a good understanding of the biochemical pathways involved and know which ones I wanted to target, and then just pick the fewest number of supplements that could impact those pathways, just to avoid myself getting overwhelmed, and then also to avoid the potential for negative interactions, because it's theoretically possible that we could take, different supplements, and then some they could be acting on competing pathways and then cancel each other out. So it's hard, and it's really, we just need a lot more research to be able to identify these synergies and then potential negative interactions.
Yeah, it's the bottom line of every research, right? We need more
You
research.
need more research. Yeah.
Okay, how much attention do you pay to your sleep?
So sleep, I've identified a few things that definitely make an impact. So I sleep better when my room is colder. I sleep better if I have a wind down routine before I go to bed. I sleep better if I take my sleep cocktail, which I mentioned earlier is either glycine or tryptophan combined with magnesium, and a microdose of melatonin. And then I sleep better if I use the blue light blocking glasses before bed. And I sleep better if I haven't eaten before bed. And especially eating a heavy meal before bed is really bad. And interestingly, these all line up with all the variables that Brian Johnson's identified for his sleep. He takes sleep more seriously than I do, but I kind of independently identified these variables as being important for me, and it seems to line up with what he's identified. I'm naturally a night owl, so if I don't force myself to wind down, I could easily just stay up until 2 a.m. doing stuff and reading stuff. But that's bad for my sleep quality. So I notice I do sleep better if I stick to a consistent routine and if I try to go to bed around 12. And I find if I go to bed around 12, then my body naturally wakes up around 8. And yeah, sleep is incredible. I notice such a big difference in my energy and quality of life the next day when I've achieved a good night's sleep versus a bad night's sleep. And I've been grateful to not go through a period of prolonged sleep deprivation, but from talking to people who have, it really, I think, can wear you down over time and make a semi-permanent to permanent impact on your health.
What about exercise, strength training and cardio, or do you have secret sauce here?
Nothing too secret. So with exercise, I try to work out at least 4 days a week, and I do a mix of weightlifting and cardio. So for the weightlifting, I do a full body workout where in the weightlifting session, I do a upper body push exercise, an upper body pull exercise, and a exercise. So for the leg exercises, that could be either squats or deadlifts. For the upper body push and pull, that could be that's going to be things like bench press, bent over barbell row, pull-ups, dips, overhead press. Sure, I'm missing some. I do some shoulder cable isolation exercise. I do some face pulls to try to counteract the effect of just being hunched over a computer typing all day. But by doing all those things, I hit all the major muscle groups. And then for cardio, I do a mix of zone 2 and zone 5. My zone 2 cardio is just power walking for a long time on the treadmill. And then zone 5, I try to run a 6-minute mile. I don't always achieve it if I'm kind of tired that day, but if I'm well rested, then I can run the 6-minute mile. And yeah, that sums it up. Mix of full body weightlifting and then zone 2 and zone 5 cardio.
All right. In previous conversation, in fact, I believe you only gave one other interview online. Is that correct?
Yes, I think there's one other one that's out right now, and then one that's incoming, and then of course this one with you now. So I think it'll be 3 total.
Yeah, just for the listeners to know as well. One moment.
Is it Degrees of Health?
Longevity DXT.
Longevity.
All right. So anyway, in that interview, you said you shared or alluded to a story about massage that you found something great about a great massage therapist, and I want to hear about that. But quickly before that, let me just tell you that I am a huge fan of massage. When I was in after university, I never finished it, but after I left it, I moved to Asia, to Taiwan, and there was massage everywhere, and I went to massage every day, sometimes even twice or even 3 times a day.
Wow.
So I was really, really into massage. But one thing became clear to me is that it doesn't really seem to be worth too much. Like, it feels great. I get a bit more relaxed, but I mean, I can't really, there is really nothing that I can show for. So I started reading about massage, and with Paul Ingram's writings, I interviewed him, by the way. But in his writing, one of his writings, no, almost all of his writings, he talks about trigger point therapy. And I started doing this trigger point therapy for myself, which is just a fancy name for if you find a sore spot, then keep pushing it. And I started doing that. I find a sore spot and I just keep pushing it. And I realized if I push it long enough or hard enough and in the right angle, then eventually it stops become sore. Sometimes it's after one session. Sometimes it's you have to keep working on it for a month or so. But when I realized that I can just keep pushing at specific parts of my body and it becomes better, I thought like, oh my God, this is the best thing ever, you know? So so anyway, uh, I think the problem with me getting massages from massage therapists were that, you know, they don't have time to spend their time on the most relevant points for 15 minutes or whatnot. They are moving through your body quickly. So my question to you is, what is your massage story? Is this something similar or is it's completely different that I don't even know about?
So I go to a masseuse who does deep tissue massage, and she approaches it like a to me it almost feels like a medical therapy as opposed to just something that you do to relax and feel good. It actually can be very uncomfortable and very painful, but the relief I got afterwards was great. So she would focus on the trigger points and the tight muscles, and she has a good knowledge of anatomy, and she would just really get in there deep and stretch them out, and it can be really painful while it's happening. But then afterwards, I would definitely notice improved flexibility, improved strength in the gym, actually. That was a surprising result for me. I guess my muscles had been getting too tight and constricted, and they weren't able to maybe contract properly during the weightlifting movement. So after getting stretched out and the trigger points worked out, their muscle fibers able to move better and lift the weight better. So I think massaging can be great, a great therapeutic tool. It just needs to be for long enough and then concentrated enough in the troubled area and then going deep. And I think if you're not going so deep that if you're not feeling pain, you're probably not going hard and deep enough, is my guess. And then I actually I've also had a great experience with something called dry needling, and that's where the physical therapist takes an acupuncture needle, but they don't use it for acupuncture. They find the tight spots in the muscle and they lance them with the needle. And that basically it breaks up the knot in the muscle and forces the muscle to contract and spasm and then release. Acts like a reset on that muscle fiber.
You can feel that?
Yeah, it's very dramatic. You could feel it going like fluttering. It can be kind of violent sometimes how hard it flutters and then it relaxes.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And so that is like a hard reset for the muscle. And I think if you pair that with, at least for me, it worked really well to pair it with the deep tissue massage. So I would get dry needling done, and then I would follow it up with deep tissue massage to just stretch out those newly released muscles, help them stay in place.
When I become a billionaire, I'm going to get your massage therapist to move to my place. And anyway, okay.
Shout out to Candace and Liz for helping my body so much.
Yeah, Candice and Liz. Good job. Good job. Maybe you're the reason why he's the number 3 on the Rejuvenation Olympics.
So yeah, maybe.
Okay, so many people listening here who are not doing that well. Pitch one low-hanging fruit for them that they could start doing right now. But it's a low-hanging fruit, right?
Low hanging fruit. I would say fixing sleep habits or fixing diet could be the two easiest first steps to take. And fixing either one of those could lead to a really dramatic difference in how a person feels and their energy levels, which would then make exercise easier for them. So then they could ride that positive feedback into exercise. Like think of like a snowball rolling downhill. And then, but yeah, either sleep or diet. And then also cutting out or drastically minimizing alcohol and completely cutting out things like cigarettes and drugs like cocaine or all those other horrible things. That if someone's doing that, that should be the first thing they get rid of. But I think either sleep or diet is it can be quick to change and can have really great dramatic impacts.
That's probably the best advice you can give, but none of them are easy. Anyway,
Yeah, well, I would say they're easier than exercise because exercise, when people are first getting into it, can be so exhausting, and the process of dragging yourself to the gym can feel so hard for some people. But it'll depend. What's easier for someone will depend on their weaknesses. If someone has an unhealthy relationship with food, then changing their diet may be the hardest thing for them, and they should start with changing sleep. For some people, maybe diet's not the issue, and so changing their diet will be easier for them. But one of those two key lifestyle foundations, changing those, I think have great ripple effects.
You see, I was always good at doing the exercise. I was always good at doing things, but I was always bad at not doing things, right? I can conquer my inner bitch and go to the gym and go at it consistently, but I cannot consistently at every single moment in my life. I'm not doing cocaine, but you know what I mean? Like things that you have to restrain yourself every moment of your life, right? And that's always the hard things for me. Okay, contrarian question time.
All right, let's do it.
What's one thing that you strongly believe to be the case, but very few people agree with you on?
That is hard. Well, I don't have too many super controversial opinions, but I have a view of the universe that probably a lot of people would find weird. I like to imagine reality in the universe as being a multiverse where there's a bunch of parallel worlds, and in these worlds, there's different versions of you that made different decisions. And so, in some parallel world, there's a version of me that's not a lawyer, that's something else. In another world, there's a version of me that's unhealthy. So my goal, I guess my goal is to end up in the best possible version of these parallel worlds, and what that means. The implication of this worldview for me is that I have agency over my actions, and it's up to me to make sure I end up in the best version of one of these parallel worlds. I don't believe that there's that things are predestined, and that I don't operate under the philosophy of, oh, whatever is meant to be will be. I think, no, I got to go out and seize it and make sure I end up in the best parallel world for me. And I've had some people really push back on that worldview, so that's the reason why I answered your question with that story. But I think there's a fair number of people that think the same way I do.
So I want to ask you that you find this way of thinking about the word useful, or you have reason to believe that this is the case, that there are these parallel words.
I guess mainly the mainly the first one that I find it useful, but I guess there's some implications of recent discoveries in physics and in quantum mechanics that at least say that such a view of the universe is plausible. Doesn't prove it by any means, but says that it could be, that things could be this way.
Well, and even just finding it useful, like that's the pragmatic truth. Like, what's the pragmatic truth? Is whatever works.
Exactly.
Finally, do you have something for the listeners that you would like to advertise, that you would like them to point towards?
So I mentioned earlier that I take a bunch of different tests, lab tests, to measure my progress, and I post my results on my Instagram page. So if you want to track my results, you can follow me on Instagram. It's at Daniel Lewis, then the number 4, and then the word life. So at Daniel Lewis for life, and there you can see some of my results. And I'm going to brag a little bit about some results that I've achieved. I'm especially proud of. My omic age, which is a measure of epigenetic age, is 5 years younger than my chronological age. You can see that result up there. My epigenetic proxy of telomere length is like that of an 18-year-old versus my chronological age being 35. And then my symphony age, which is an epigenetic measure of organ age. My composite symphony age is 20. And then my epigenetic age for each organ system has declined significantly since I started my full longevity and supplement protocol. So all those results and more you can find on my Instagram, and follow along to see my journey and my lab results.
Daniel Lewis, 4 lives from 4 parallel universes on Instagram. Thank you very much for coming and sharing your journey with me.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.